Let's talk about importing assets into Unreal Engine from marketplaces like Sketchfab or what's left of it, or the really not so well working Fab right now that bombards us with all kinds of file formats. So you want to bring something into Unreal Engine and it doesn't work properly. What can you do? I like to go through Blender, and Blender isn't everyone's cup of tea, but it's really the one thing that makes you get a cohesive output that will definitely work in Unreal Engine. So I'm making this video specifically for Julia, who's recently tried to bring in a couple of statues for our project, and they came in like this. Even though the file format was perfectly fine, from what she downloaded, it was one of those things that just, this isn't a good look. This is not what it looked like on the sales page, which was actually here from Sketchfab. This was from the Virtual Museums of Malopolska, the St. Paul and St. Peter statues here. So there's sort of wood carvings here, and we wanted to use them in a church or in a chapel, sort of side chapel that we were building, and it didn't work out. So what can we do? Let me talk you through the whole process, in fact, with these two statues, because even though they're by the same developer, they're not oriented and sized up the same way. So we can take care of that in Blender so that they work side by side in our Unreal Engine project. So first of all, the formats you get both from Fab as well as other sources, they can be a little bit weird and confusing. So on Fab we have, something that says converted formats. I suppose we have that here as well. FBX was the original, and then we have a few derivatives of it. And what that really means is that the developer would have uploaded one, and then the system automatically would have converted that to other formats. And that is often both helpful as well as not helpful. So if FBX was the original, that is something we know we can handle. So I'm going to go and download that. Just for completion, OBJ and FBX, those are the two main formats that come both with textures, but the materials don't look fantastic because you have to set up those materials in your target application. So that means you have to know where which map goes when you build that material and so forth. This is where these other formats here come in and sort of help you. USD, A or Z, doesn't matter, usually starts with USD and then either Z or A or C at the end, I believe. Those are point cloud formats. So they're a little bit like Alembic in that they describe the shape of the object, but they're not really suitable for making changes to it. So you can display them, and the benefit is that the materials are properly set up for it, but you can't actually change them. So if you wanted to morph them into something, if you want to chop bits off, you can't use USD for that. It's also tricky because usually any sort of target application builds a sort of container to display these things, so I don't recommend you use that. GLTF and GLB, they're sort of newer formats. They try to overcome the discrepancies that we have in FBX and OBJ in that they can be used to make changes to the object. They also come with properly set up materials, so usually target applications can understand how the material is supposed to be set up. So you're supposed to drag them in and you'll see the roughness and metallicity and all these things properly set up without having to build a material. So you can try that as well, but often the pivot point I found isn't where it needs to be. So they can cause trouble in other areas, which is why I'm going to go and focus on the FBX here. Long story short, and once it's downloaded, let's have a look here in my file explorer here. I'm going to go and extract it first, so that is obvious. But there's a couple of other things that I wanted to make you aware of. If you go into this, you have two folders here. One's the source folder, which contains the single FBX file. That is what we want. But then you have this other folder, which is textures folder. And sometimes one of these is there's also another zip file in there. If you ever find that, go and unzip that as well. So in my case, that wasn't the case, but you can have it that you have something where you find another zip file and you have to also unzip that because there might also be other textures in there. I might actually do this for the other statue as well, just so that we can see the difference here. Download that one as well, also as FBX. Go back to that and also unzip St. Peter. Extract all, nice and easy. And usually what I then do, go and delete the zip files because we don't need them anymore. St. Peter, what has he got? He's got a source file with also an FBX. That's what we want. And then there's a textures folder, which also has probably a very long texture name in there. Okay, so that is good news. Let's go into Blender and I'll show you what I do here. So I'll bring in both statues so that I can size them up, rotate them properly, and also hopefully they come in with materials. If not, we'll go and set them up here. So File, Import, FBX. We'll do the first one. Under downloads here, St. Peter, we'll do St. Peter first. Under source, we'll go and import him. I'll leave all the defaults enabled here for now, import, and we'll just see what happens. Full stop on the numpad will zoom right in and we can see, well, he's coming in rotated. So that would happen in Unreal Engine as well. And the good thing about Blender is we can just fix that here. So click on this so that the dark orange outline goes away. And I suppose we're going to go and rotate him around the x-axis, so RX 90. That was wrong, of course, so I should have that -90. You can also go RX 180, and then we have that. So one thing I always do so that the orientation is the same on all the assets, press 1 on the numpad, and that should be the front of your object. So I can see that isn't the front, that's still the side. So let's go RZ90. It's also the wrong one. I should have said RZ -90 to turn him so that he's now facing the front. So that's all we need to do to get his orientation right. There's something else we're going to have a look at in a moment, that is the size of him. I'll switch over to the second icon here to see what this looks like with the materials on it. We only have a single texture here, so that means we only have the base material, but that's fine. We'll see if that works. Yes, so even though our lighting isn't fantastic, we can see that is the correct texture here. It's a photogrammetry statue actually, so I'm glad they had that here. And also because it's got a bit of a long name, I'm going to go and rename that into St. Peter. That's our first statue. Let me go and make that invisible again and go and bring in the second one. Once again with File, Import, FBX. And that is Paul. Under source, bring him in. Once again, same default values. Paul has also come in, but he's tiny compared to the other guy. So if I go and you can just about see it, the full stop on the numpad, and you can see him here. Let's see if we can work it out. 1 on the numpad to look at him from the front. So this is now RX -90, and that stands him up, and he's already rotated the correct way. So that's nice. But the size of both statue, oh yeah, and also F2 I'll press to rename that, and I'll call him St. Paul. So I'll go make the other guy visible again, and I can see that they're widely different sizes here. So let's go and see what should be a good size. It sort of depends how large the statues need to be in relation to the rest of your scene. If you press N on your keyboard, you'll get this side panel here, and on the top tab here you can see something that's called item, and down below here you can see the dimensions. So with whatever is selected shows you the dimensions. So neither of them make that much sense to me. I mean, it depends really what this is. If this is like a desk statue of the size of about 30 centimeters, or if it's a human type statue. Let's make this a human type size so that it's the same size as a character that we want to bring in. So that would mean it would have to be around 2 meters on the Z. You can either type this in here, or you can bring in a cube. That's what I like to do. Shift A, mesh, and then bring in your favorite cube here. And you know the cube is 2 meters. It's not quite 2 meters tall because it's in the middle here. So press GZ1 to bring it up. And now we can go and size up our figures just so that they match the cube. I'll move it over GX a little bit, and then I'll select my first statue, and I'm just going to go and size him up. So S, and just bring him up to something like here. Then he's about 2 meters tall here, 197. At least that's, you know, some sort of scale that we can work with. Make him invisible, make the other guy visible. S, just drag him, make him larger so that he's at least the same size as the other guy. You can adjust the height as well. I don't think they line up perfectly with one another here. One's a little bit higher than the other guy, so you could go correct that as well. But I think we're in pretty good shape here for now. These are both the guys in the center here. But something else that I like to correct is the pivot point. In this case, it is where it needs to be, but if the pivot point would be something like, you know, over here, you can go and correct that by setting it to the 3D cursor. So you just right click and say set origin to the 3D cursor, which is usually right here. This is like the red and white stripy circly bit. And if it isn't there, like imagine it is somewhere else, you can go and say Shift S and then you say cursor to world origin, and that'll snap it right where it needs to be. That's all we needed to do here. Let's go get rid of our cube and also save our scene while we're at it. Might as well do that here in the downloads folder, statues I'll call it. And we can go and select one of them. So if you keep both of them selected, you may risk both of them exporting. If you make one of them invisible, then you know only this one gets exported. And we do that by going to File, Export, and once again, FBX is a good format. Let's stay that way. And I'll put this on my desktop here, maybe in the statues folder, and this one is St. Paul. And FBX is nice in that you don't have to worry about scale so much, because the scale of 1 will be imported properly into Unreal Engine. With OBJ, it's a little different. If you were to export this as an OBJ, you would need to know how OBJ is interpreted on the target app. So let's leave that on 1. And there's another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, this limit to the selected objects. Had you had both visible in the scene, you can choose this option and then only this selected object will be exported, which is sort of what we want. You can leave everything else as it is, export, and then that's that. Select the next guy here and do the same. If you do this often, you can also use the quick menu like I do. I just press Q and then this menu goes up and the bottom option then becomes the export an FBX file. You can set that up on any function by just right clicking on the particular thing that you want to do. So just right click here and then it adds that particular function to your quick menu. I like using that. So in statues here, this is going to be St. Peter. Export him, and just gave me an error. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Let's try that again. Export FBX and St. Peter. Do that. There we go. Now it's got it. I don't know what went wrong there. So now that we have a proper FBX from Blender that's properly oriented, let me show you how we import these things into Unreal Engine. So maybe I'll go and make myself a new folder here. I'll call it assets, and then I'll go and import the first one. That will be on my desktop in statues, and we'll use St. Paul for this. We can use both of them, that's fine. It'll ask you if you wanted to look for textures and materials. I prefer to set all these things up myself. Usually the defaults are all zeros here in offset translation, and the uniform scale is also 1. If you didn't do this adjustment in Blender, you could go and do this here if you knew exactly how these things are coming in. I find that a little too cumbersome because I don't get a visual preview. Just know that this is there. I also like to set up my own material, so I tick this box off, and on textures it's the same thing. I'm not going to import any textures because I'm going to go and do this manually. So I'm going to go and import these 2 objects. There were issues with the import. You can have a look at that or not. It says, what does it say? No smoothing groups were found. That's sort of an error that Unreal Engine always tells us, and it never really is a problem, so don't worry about it. These guys have come in there now and equal size, so we can go and use them. They're also rotated the proper way, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's already a big win. All we need to now do is figure out the materials for these guys. So you can either go and make yourself a master material and then make an instance of that, or you can just have master materials for both of these guys. It doesn't really matter. I'll stick to the very simple way and say we're going to make one new folder, and we're going to call that one textures, and then we're going to make maybe another one that we call materials. And in textures we're going to go and import these original textures that came from the downloads folder. So one's for St. Peter under textures here, and because it's such a long name I might actually rename that here, and this is just St. Peter base texture, I suppose. If you had multiple, use sparingly or only rename what makes sense to you. And then we have the other one that was St. Paul, Pavel they call him, very nice. So this is St. Paul base texture, and that's those. And in material, I'm going to go and right click and choose material here, and I'll call this M St. Paul, and I'll make another one in a minute that I'll just override. So this one, I'll open that with the double click, and this looks more convoluted than it actually is. I can just go to my textures here and drag in the St. Paul texture and any other textures that I need, like roughness, metallicity, depending on what came with the asset. We don't have any, so I'll just go and use this. And the only other thing I might change here is that black doesn't really look black, so that's a specular thing. If you drag that down to say 0.2, then you'll see that the contrast is a bit punchier. And the roughness, it's supposed to be wood, and we don't have an additional roughness map, so 0 would be super shiny, 1 would be super matte. I'm going to go and say 0.7 perhaps, and maybe that sort of passes as a good wood here. Hit save and apply this material to our first suspect here, which is St. Paul, just like that. And then moments later, hopefully, we have a relatively good looking material on the statue. Very nice. If this needed to look even better, we could bring this into Substance Painter and just, do all kinds of things to it. But I think for what we need it for, I think it's probably going to be quite nice this way. I will do the same thing with the other material. We're just going to hit Control D on this to duplicate that. And we're going to call this M St. Peter. Open that up, and all we need to do here is change the texture over. So we had St. Paul's base before in textures, and now we're going to use St. Peter. I like to just select this and then go in here and just click that little arrow icon, and that plugs in whatever is selected in the content browser. And these values, they're going to work the same. So on St. Peter, same here. I can use the material St. Peter and then go and click that little arrow icon, and that plugs it right in there. Whoops, that was the wrong one, wasn't it? Sorry about that. There. Oh, it's because we didn't hit save. So this is actually using the other texture. So on St. Peter, hit save. So then it compiles this thing, and then it looks a lot better. Ooh, there we go. Yeah, one of those things. Control Shift S to save everything. And that's our statues done and dusted. So that's how I like working with Blender and with assets. And I always like to keep an eye on the size and the orientation. And I know that no matter which format I bring in, could be GLTF, could be an OBJ or whatnot, if I bring it into Blender first and then size it up, make sure it looks okay here, then I know if I export it with known values, then it's also going to work in Unreal Engine. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about this process, then please let me know, and I'll try my best to answer your questions. Have fun with both Blender and Unreal Engine, and I hope I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.